Okay, so everybody should be seeing my screen. So um, I put a little header, unbroken links to the past, the Kalmia Club and the Masonic Lodge. Um, the reason I wanted to call attention to the unbroken links is that in Lambertville, we have a long history of clubs, societies, and associations that have contributed to the greater good. Um, and they've also contributed mightily to our cityscape. So the buildings that they've been based of are still with us today. I wanted to start with two that where the buildings are well known to us, but the clubs or the associations are not. First, we have at 26 Bridge Street, the former Oddfellows Lodge. So that's the Independent Order of Oddfellows. You may note at the bottom, it's the Sojourner store, and there it's the Lenny Lenape Lodge number 15. Um, a lesser known um, organization was called the Knights of Pythias, K of P, and 47 Bridge Street, uh, where Sneddon's is at the bottom. It used to be a lodge, and Knights of Pythias is no longer with us, but well known to us. Um, Today, Kalmia Club and the Masonic Lodge are still with us. They're still formidable organizations. They have great buildings, which we'll learn about, but they also have very great uh, ongoing programs and services that they engage in. You may wonder, why is there a license plate at the top right? Discover New Jersey history. And that is a very good question. I put it there because our first speaker today, Kate Bruning, happens to live in that house. It's a you may not know that, but that license plate features what they call on the state's website a row home, a Victorian row home on North Union Street, and that Kate and her husband bought that house in 1985 and live in it. Kate joined the Kalmia Club shortly thereafter. In 1992, it occurred to her that the club didn't have a historian. And the next thing she knew, she became the club historian, finding boxes full of photos, old yearbooks, and snippets from newspapers. And she has been the Kalmia Club historian ever since. So we're going to pull up her presentation and we're going to get right into it. Everybody, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Are we going okay so far? Cool. And okay, Kate. So take it away. Take it. You'll have to unmute yourself first, and then take it away, and I'll drive.
There we go.
There
Okay.
you go. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, this is hello, everybody, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm sure that many of you have seen this, this beautiful house, and what probably wondered what the heck is going on in there. But so what I'm going to just explain to you that the house was built. Um, Let me see here. The house was built in the mid 1800s, and it had originally been used as a school for boys. And later, after they were there for a while, um, they didn't need it anymore, so they gave it to the Quakers, and were called the Society of Friends, and they used it for 20 years. And what's interesting is um, there's two entrances. There's the entrance that's by the driveway, and then there's an entrance on the other side. And that was because the Quakers wanted to have women on one side, men on the other, and that's how they did it. So they were there for quite a while, and then they decided their congregation started dwindling down and everything, and they went back to Pennsylvania. And what they did was they gave the house, the property, to the Kalmia Club. And before that, the Kalmia Club, and then I'm going to go back, I'm going to bring it back to say the Kalmia Club had been a group of women with interests in reading and started in 1892. These women were, yes, that's the Kalmia latifolia, and that's what I'm going to get to. They were interested in reading and intellectual pursuits, and they started what they called the Reading Circle. And the 45 chartered members were educated, and in many cases, wealthy women who gathered several times a month in one another's homes to discuss literature, art, gardening, music, and drama. Clubs like this were very common in around the United States in those times, in the 1890s, and the post-Civil War era. So to be asked to be asked to join was an honor, and women were just so thrilled when they were asked if they wanted to come, because then they could get dressed up with hats, gloves, have their hair done, wear beautiful clothing. And that was, and even just going to each other's homes, they made it into something that was really beautiful. A year after organizing the Women's Circle, it changed its name from the Women's Circle to the Kalmia Club, because Kalmia was said to be a flower that was in all the states of the United States. And that's what they were hoping, that their Kalmia Club would go throughout the entire United States. It didn't, but anyway, Kalmia, the club is, let me see here. According to club lore, it grew in each of the 43 states of the Union, and its founders, yes, envisioned the club expansion through the city, the country. Anyway, so 5 years later, in 1897, the club became part of the General Federation of Women's Clubs. And it's an international women's organization dedicated to community improvement, enhancing the lives of others, and volunteer service. So in the sense, they did go throughout the whole entire United States. So what, I think I'm gonna, let me see here. Where am I gonna go next? Hold on. Okay. I think I'm gonna start. Yes, that's exactly where I'm going. He knows that. This is one of the first pages of the yearbook in 1898, the Kalmia yearbook. And it has the names of the president, as you can see, Lily Arndt Williams, Mrs. Coriel. They don't use their real names, they use their husband's names for the most part. And I want to just say real quick about this woman, the woman Lily Arndt Williams. She was president in 1919 to 1919. She was born in Lambertville. She was a well-educated and large factor in directing the child study movement throughout the state of New Jersey. Besides her career as a teacher, Miss Williams, she never married. Miss Williams was a public lecturer on subjects of psychology, history, and literature. So look, if you look at all these names, so many names you'll see that we hear, that we still hear here, Titus, and all the different names that make Welsh. So interesting, I think, to look at these names. Okay, next one, please. This is the interior of the Kalmia Club. And the beautiful paintings are from a woman that she wasn't even a member of the Kalmia Club. Her name is Nancy Stark. I think she lives in Hopewell now. And she was the one who did these beautiful paintings, and she didn't charge us. She just did it because she thought the Kalmia Club was so beautiful, she wanted to make it even better. And we have our old piano on the right-hand side, which is, before this all happened, that piano was being played all the time. So many songs, such good times with the piano. But, you know, hopefully we'll be doing it again. Okay, next. Okay, this is from the Beacon. This is another yearbook. This is the 1911-1912 yearbook. And what I wanted to have this in here because the Kalmia Club isn't just a club for women. during the war, that was a dressing. They used the Kalmia Club formed a branch for surgical dressing committee to prepare dressings for the wounded soldiers in the war during Europe and here. And it was really kind of an amazing thing that they donated that, and that was I think was very nice of them to do. Okay, next. Okay, good. So this is the 1920s, and this is I'm glad I'll read it to you, but I'm sure you can see it. I just went pretty much like just up until the 30s, and one of the things that they were saying, they had a motto. The motto was, "The world is full of number of things. I'm sure we should all be happy as kings." And that I thought was very nice. And they loved Shakespeare. So there was another in the 22, 23, they had another motto that was, "These most brisk and giddy paced times, Shakespeare." Interesting, I think. 25 to 26, America first, not merely in matters material, but in things of spirit. And in 28 to 29, remember world, this is an age of wings. Anonymous. Next. Okay, now we're in the 30s. And 1930s was, it was a kind of a different time. I'm going to read these things to you, not all of them, but in the 1930s, the fortnight evening meetings were educated and existed from October 1st to May 27th. The discussions ran the gamut from the present situation in Germany, life in Labrador, our 47th birthday, and facts concerning marijuana. So that was way back. People were smoking pot then. And that was kind of interesting. And so the 30s, Mrs. Prahl was the president of the club, and she would express the interest of those people that wanted welfare and progress and was trying to do good things for the city and help people, that needed money, and to just be good citizens of the city of Lambertville. Okay, 1940s. In the 1940s, World War II was quietly on the doorstep in the early 1940s. In the yearbook, the women were still talking about the county fair, the book discussions, romances of textiles. Eventually, world affairs would become a concern. Special events began to be less vociferous and more world affairs. Robert G. Albion, professor of history at Princeton University, was invited twice to discuss world affairs. So people they were not fooling around anymore. Now they were really starting to think this is important. And and as everybody knows, what happened in the 1940s, and then we had the 1950s. And after that, people were a little bit less buttoned up. And a typical meeting would be patriotism and American tradition and different thoughts, I think. It was a time to heal. It was time to heal from the war. The Kalmia calendar was still full of meetings regarding the war and throughout the decade, but then, and also safeguarding our liberties, patriotism, and an American tradition. What's going on in Washington? Where were typical social meetings topics, but things were lightening up. And by 1958 and 1929, they were lightening up and getting back to normal, as were the meetings. And you can see that it was like that because they said, "A night at the theater with Michael Ellis, Lights Across the Delaware, My Fair Lady." These were big hits for the women of Kalmia. And then we have the 60s, sorry, 90s. In the 90s, in the 60s, Kalmia Club meetings became a once a month affair. Instead of twice a month, it was a once a month. They had potluck suppers and Christmas parties. And along with a bus trips to New York City and an evening with Sir St. John Terrell, well, at, gosh, I can't remember the name, but everybody knows about, I think everybody knows about the music hall. And that was really very nice. Okay, let's go second, we're going to 70s. Okay, in the 1970s, throughout the decade, Kalmia continued with the picnics and the piano recitals and the plays and the singings and potlucks. In addition, the club was well aware of what was going on in the world. The Panama Canal was very much on the public eye at the time, and the city newspapers, the Beacon and the Lambertville Record, were at the Kalmia Club that November Thursday in 1977 to record a feature of a Titusville speaker, Paul H. Kielfer. He said his wife had visited the canal twice, and they illustrated with slides what it looked like along the path of the controversial waterway. The public was invited, and a sizable audience attended. It was, big times, picnics, as I said, and then we had come to the 80s. Oh, yeah, we're at the 80s. Okay, well, as far as the 80s go, that's when I got here. I got here in 1985, and I didn't know a soul, and we bought our house, and we started to fix it up, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't know a thing about Kalmia. And I ran into somebody that I had known when I was working in Princeton, and her name was Bernice Farley Snyder. And she said, "Oh, Kate, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I live here now." And she said, "Oh, you have to join Kalmia." Oh, because her mother was one of the original presidents, and she was also a president. So next thing you know, I went to Kalmia. I loved it. The minute I walked in there, I loved it. I just thought it was just so great. And there were so many new people in town, and was really just everybody was so friendly, and I just really loved it. So when I first got there, there was one of the times where the first time I got there was a woman named Linda Cunningham, and she was the executive editor of the Trenton Times newspaper. And she spoke to the women of Kalmia about the changing role of women in media. I just loved it. That's okay. That's for me. And it was just great. So then in the 90s, all right. So before even the community cookbook, this was in the early 90s. I had looked around and said, nobody has taken, there's nobody here that's like historically making sure that everybody knows what happened to this beautiful place. So I started being the club historian, and that's how it happened. But what happened also in the 90s, because we had the Pat Vartanian, I don't even know if anybody remembers that name, but her husband had a beautiful place right on the street of Lambertville. Anyway, so we decided that we needed to make more money to give to the city of Lambertville. So we decided in 1995 that we were going to start a community cookbook. And the recipes in the cookbook collection came from people throughout the city of Lambertville. It represented churches, fire companies, schools, businesses, civic, cultural, historical. Many of the recipes are in the memory of family and friends. From Australian sugar plums to Chinese birthday noodles, the special loves of many family traditions are shared in this cookbook. And it was really, really, really a very, very great thing. It was so much fun. We made so much money, and we were able to give away so much of it to the city. And it was really great. We really loved it. Okay, now we will now that wasn't enough. Oh yes, here it is. Here's some of the menus. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, Dave Del Vecchio had a menu, had put in something, and everybody, you would just know the shad. People were, Fred Lewis, and pickled shad. Can you imagine? It was just really, really kind of interesting, I think. And in the next year, in 1996, as if that wasn't enough, was our first garden tour. And it was Lambertville Secret Garden Tours Are Discovered. It was in June 6, 1996, the Kalmia Club offered its first self-guided tour of the hidden gardens of Lambertville. The tour began at the Clubhouse on York Street, and maps and directions were given to the homes, handed out, and tour goers explore the gardens at their own pace. Waterfalls, lush greens, fountains, blooming plants, fish ponds, all delights. People just loved it. And every year it got more and more. And we made more and more money and gave more and more money to scholarships, especially. Now we were doing scholarships for girls in the high school, the Lambertville High School. So we would have scholarships for 3 to 5 people, girls, depending on the money that we could get, and they would have scholarships for their school, their school-ish. And so that was really, really wonderful. And so we still, up until the pandemic, these garden tours went on every single year in June until last year. Very sad. Anyway, let's go to the 20s. This is the 21st century, and the continued membership of the Federation of Women's Clubs, the January night book clubs. That started in January. The January book club, everybody would bring a book and everybody would talk about their favorite book they had. That was fun. It was the beginning of a new decade and a new century for the Kalmia Club in the entire world. The club continued to belong to the Federation of Women's Clubs, of course, the largest volunteer women's service organization in the state, and a member of the General Federation of Women's Clubs throughout the United States. The club continued to abide by the bylaws of the Federation, but the Kalmia Club, being the outlier it was, every month of the new century should have a January book night. That's how it ended up doing the book nights. And that continued as well until last year. And it was just those were one of the most fun times, when there would be 40 women there and everybody would have something to say about their books. So fun. Anyway, I just want to say, even now, when we're, everything has kind of come to a halt, and we will continue when it comes back. But the club is an active civic force in the community, providing scholarships to high school girls, as I said, and supporting local charities. And contributes to various international, national, and statewide activities through the membership of the Federation of Women's Clubs, as well as the International Federation. And last, and this is, I just had to say it because it's just to me, it's just so depressing. Until the pandemic of March 2019 was silenced, not only the Kalmia Club, but most of the world was silenced as well. And thank you. Oh, and the club song. Yeah, that's right. Nobody really sang it, but we had it in the book every year. And it's, if you want to read it, I'm not going to read it to you because I don't even know how it sounded. But anyway, thank you for listening. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Kate, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And what I want to ask everyone, so I see there's some questions in the chat, and they're awesome. We're going to get to those. We're going to do David's, we're going to do the next presentation, and then we're going to do questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
So, because for example, Kate, just to tee you up, what is the garden tour coming back is one of the questions. So we'll get to that after David. So so David Coyce, our next presenter, is a former resident of Lambertville, a Freemason since 2008, and a member of the Amwell Lodge since 2012. David is a past master, having previously served the lodge as worshipful master in 2017, and he's been the lodge historian since 2012. Today, he currently serves as the lodge treasurer and the chairman of the Amwell Lodge, their 175th anniversary committee. Although the complete historical record of the lodge has never been officially documented, David has been working diligently to preserve its history. And David is a licensed professional planner who works for Hillsborough Township, specializing in the areas of economic development and sustainability. On that note, David, we're seeing your screen, and you'll need to unmute yourself and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
All right, let me just make sure the slides are changing. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Your first question might be, well, what is Freemasonry? And before we dive into all the history of Amwell Lodge in Lambertville, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Freemasonry is. Part of being able to talk about that, we could talk about what Freemasonry is not. So Freemasonry is not a religion. It's a fraternal organization. It's a charitable organization. Our members, in order to join, someone has to be 18 years old. It's a male fraternity. One of the belief requirements that someone has to have is a belief in a single God. Another requirement is also for a person to be of good standing in the community, has to have references to show that. Freemasonry bases some of its background on the Middle Ages, when basically the builders would possess a unique set of skills in order to build all the temples and cathedrals. And one of the ways that those builders preserved their knowledge was they organized into lodges at the time and came up with a set of passwords, ways to recognize each other as they were traveling from country to country. They would need to figure out a way, as they all spoke, as some of them spoke different languages, they needed to create a system of how to recognize each other. Now, flash forward to today, we're no longer operative Masons. We're now, basically everything is based on the symbolism of being Freemasons, but we still carry over a lot of those principles. Probably the most common symbol you see is the square and compass. You can see that in a number of different places. So instead of building buildings, although ironically I will be talking about the lodge itself, building the iconic building that we have today. And by the way, we hired an architect and we hired a builder. We did not build it ourselves, other than paying for it. But basically, we use the symbolism. We use the symbols from that time period as ways to try to grow better men. We use the concepts of these tools to basically kind of help us be better members of the community. This is just some of our members. This is what we look like in terms of wearing aprons. At our lodge meetings, we have one lodge meeting a month. It's the second Wednesday of the month. And so you can see a number of the different members there. So how did we get started? So before Amwell Lodge number 12 was founded in Lambertville, Freemasonry in the area actually dates back to across the river in New Hope. At the time, I believe it was referred to also as Coriolis Ferry. There was actually a lodge called Orange Lodge that was there from 1802 to about 1837. And then for about a decade, there was no Freemasonry in the immediate area until they decided to start a lodge in New Jersey. We have found some documentation that there are at least one or two Orange Lodge members that were founders of Amwell Lodge. So there was a number of petitioners. Here are some of the different names. Some of you might recognize some of those names, or you might not at all. Some of them might have been a little bit lost to history. So on June 16th, 1847 is actually when Amwell Lodge was instituted. And it was actually, the event occurred in the Oddfellows building, but not the current Oddfellows building. There was a building that predated the beautiful building that currently exists, and it was known as the Stone House. And the Amwell Freemasons were a tenant for several years. And as Mike had mentioned earlier, there were a number of fraternal societies, organizations. Some people would have called them back then, or even now, secret societies. This is our charter. So the lodge was instituted, and what Freemasonry would do back then is it was kind of like a tryout. So they would institute a lodge, and if the lodge was doing well, they would then give a charter. So we're instituted in June of 1847, and then in January of 1848, the Grand Lodge of New Jersey gave Amwell Lodge a charter. And this is actually what our charter looks like. It still exists. We have it displayed in the lodge, and it has it has all the names of the petitioners and all of the Grand Lodge people that would have been in charge at that time. So Masonry really started to take off. It was not the most popular fraternal organization in Lambertville at the time. That most likely would have been the Oddfellows, which would also say why they would have had a building. And it was very common for a number of those different fraternities would actually help each other out, in that they would be renting out space for different organizations. And a number of members would belong to multiple organizations. I'm going to get a little bit into that a little bit later when we talk about the actually first mayor of Lambertville, which was Samuel Lilly. He was not only a Freemason, but he was also an Oddfellow. For Masonry, and we're going to go a little bit into this when we go inside the building, and I get to show you what our lodge looks like. Freemasonry today, and even back then, has some specific needs in terms of how the meetings are basically conducted and how everything is organized, where things are placed. So one of the challenges that the lodge would have had by renting out space is that the Oddfellows layout would not have been exactly accommodating. So there was definitely a need at some point for the lodge to purchase land for itself and to eventually build a building. So in 1864, they actually made the big purchase, and the map on the left-hand side, you could see actually shows what the lodge property looked like before those buildings that were there were raised, and the Masonic building would have replaced it. So it's a little bit of a glimpse into what Bridge Street would have looked like on that side. Interesting thing, you could see the former rug store. Apologize, I don't know if it has a better name than that. Now that the rug store is not there, you could see that building is still there. So the Masonic building would have been built right next to it. Samuel Lilly played a really important role into Amwell Lodge building its new building. And at that time, they referred to the building as Masonic Hall. That was something that they had called it. You actually see on our building now that we refer to it as the Masonic building. We might have lost a little bit of that connection of why we would have called it the Masonic Hall. Sometimes you might hear Masonic buildings called temples and things like that, which unfortunately just confuses everyone and then makes them think that we're a religious organization, which we are not. And so Samuel Lilly played a really, really important role because he and another member actually took the money in trust and acquired the property that we currently sit. And Samuel Lilly also had a number of connections, including knowing Samuel Sloan, who is a famed Philadelphia architect. And he actually, the way that they knew each other is actually Samuel, Dr. Lilly at the time was actually on the state asylum board of trustees. And Samuel Sloan was hired to build their building there. And so I was able to track down all the records to show that there would have been a crossover, that the very same year that Dr. Lilly would have served on that board is the same year that Samuel Sloan was acquired as the architect of building that building, which is unfortunately no longer there. Just kind of diving in and looking through some of our original documentation, going page by page. What was really neat was to find a record, an actual document of Samuel Sloan being hired. And you could see here the value of money was a little bit different. At the time, it looks like we paid him $100 for the plans and specifications. So the Amwell Lodge had really, really big ambitions. And again, doing some research and trying to understand what was going on at the time of Freemasonry. Yes, they wanted their own building, they wanted their own space, but they were also wise to know that they wanted to be located in a really, really important spot. And they wanted some kind of model of being able to rent out space and still have a lodge space located on an upper portion of the building. So doing some research and trying to understand, well, what would have been their inspiration? What would have been the model? The actual model was Taylor Hall, located in Trenton. So that was an opera house, and that was owned and operated by John Taylor. For those of you who are pork roll or Taylor ham fans, that is the same John Taylor. When John Taylor built Taylor Hall, he actually designed the building so that, and this is the building on the screen here, he designed it so that in the back portion, you would have the opera house and you would have offices located on the second and third story. The Grand Lodge of New Jersey actually rented out space from John Taylor in this building. And Samuel Lilly, along with other influential Amwell brothers, would have known of this as an example. And they actually spoke to Samuel Sloan, the architect, and actually told him, this is what we would like you to do. We would like you to design a building based on this, based on Taylor Hall. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of pictures of the building. This is a postcard that the Lambertville Historical Society was so kind to provide us a number of years ago. And this is just to kind of show, then and now, and so that you could also see some of the similarity between Taylor Hall and Amwell's Masonic Hall. Before that, originally, when they got the specifications actually showed that Amwell Lodge had full intentions of actually building a theater in the back of the building. They were pretty much going to copycat exactly what Taylor Hall was going to be. Unfortunately, the price tag was double the price of what they ultimately ended up paying They ultimately ended up paying, the building cost about $16,500. There was an estimate it was going to cost about $32,000 if it would have included the entire hall. The building, only the front part was built. It was still designed so that if they did want to add on to the back of the building, it still has in the center of the building to be able to go in and get to the back of the building. Too much fanfare. Laying the cornerstone was a really big deal, not only to the Masons, but to the community as a whole. There's really interesting records that show that it was a really big day in Lambertville. It was a full parade. They went from one hall to another all throughout the city. And what's really neat is, so our cornerstone, you can see our cornerstone is right there, and it's still visible. You can walk by the building and you could still see it there. And what's really interesting is we're actually still in possession of the trowel that was actually used for symbolic purposes. It was part of the ceremonies that they did. There's a Masonic ceremony for several things, including buildings and laying down a cornerstone. And it's actually, that trowel was inscribed and basically captures the people who were involved in that. And the Grand Lodge of New Jersey presented Amwell Lodge that many years ago. Before we go inside, I just want to show you a little bit on the outside of the building. One of the important principles of Freemasonry is actually the number 3. So when someone becomes a Mason, there's 3 degrees. There's the entered apprentice, there's the fellowcraft, and there's the master Mason. So sometimes you might hear in popular culture, what degree Mason are you? Are you a 33rd? Yes, there are appendant bodies to Masonry, but Freemasonry, when we talk about it, the highest degree you can get is 3 degrees. And when someone has the 3rd degree, you are a master Mason. So the number 3 plays a role. And what's interesting in looking at this building and trying to analyze it, you do see the number 3 come up in a number of different areas. Can everyone see my mouse?
Yes.
You could see here that there was definitely intent to do the 3. There's actually 2 pyramids on both sides of the building here. And there's actually 1, 2, 3 layers to the pyramid. And so you could see a number of different things. You could see that the building is kind of split into 3. Some of these other symbols, it's been a little bit harder to prove that they're Masonic. Again, this was built during the Victorian time period, and they would have been taking a lot of different elements from different things. The architects back then were not formally trained. Samuel Sloan did not go to architecture school. That's not how it worked back then. Often they were builders who then started to calling themselves architects. They would pick things out in design books. Samuel Sloan is actually a really important figure because he actually published a number of design books in architecture, and was actually had a number of journals and things like that. So he was actually a really interesting person. As you can see here, this is probably why people don't call the building Masonic Hall. We've been calling it the Masonic Building for some time, as currently where the antique store is located. And you can see here too, so some of these elements that are here. Here again, you could see the elements of 3. And that's actually also common in Christianity, in terms of the, having the 3 there. And so here's just different views. You could get a better look of the pyramids here. It's really hard to see when you get closer to the building. And so this really captures it really well. And here, this oculus window that's basically in the attic. It really serves no purpose other than for aesthetic purposes. And behind this building is, or excuse me, behind this facade here is actually a half dome, and you could see part of the half dome there. One note, while they were building the building, the community was so excited, and they weren't necessarily thinking about the building as like a private building. They were thinking about it as a public symbol, as a public building almost. And they actually asked the Masons to actually build the clock tower. They wanted a clock tower to be added to the building so that there could be a clock for the entire community. Unfortunately, that didn't ultimately happen. I had some theories that maybe they put a clock inside of that Oculus window, but I could find no proof that shows that happened. Also can't find any record to show why they decided not to build the clock tower. I've only been able to find that they had considered it. Here's just some more views. As we're going to go inside of the building, just wanted to give you a little bit of a better view of what it looks like. We're essentially walking through this door here to go inside the building. So when you're walking up the steps, this is what it looks like. We have a grand staircase that takes you around. On the second floor, we have 2 tenants that are currently in there. We also have one of those old tenant spaces that we currently use for where we use it as our fellowship room for eating dinner together. And then this is what the staircase looks like going up the building, going up to the 3rd floor. The entire 3rd floor of the building is dedicated for Masonic purposes. So we got our first 2 levels that we rent out, use a portion of the 2nd floor, and the entire 3rd floor is for our purposes only. This is welcome to our lodge room. This is also what you'll see behind me. This is the most important room that we have in the building. This is the seat where the worshipful master sits in. So in other organizations, it's the equivalent to the president. And so behind there, you could see the letter G. So in Masonry, the letter G can mean God. Like I said before, to be a member is to have a belief in God. Doesn't mean you have to believe in a specific religion, but it's a belief in a one supreme being. And so the G also means geometry as well. As I said before, we have the background of being builders, so geometry would naturally fall into something that we've carried on. You can see a number of other Masonic symbols and things like that are there. And faith, charity, and hope, those are some of the principles, the tenet principles that we carry over. And you can see here, that's where our charter is. These are some other stations. So the way the lodge is organized, there's essentially 3 top officers, the worshipful master, the senior warden, and the junior warden. Again, it's like the president, a vice president, or a senior vice president, then a junior vice president. And that's how it's set up. And so from year to year, people move up through the chairs and get elected into those positions of leadership. So going back down to the 2nd floor, where I was telling you about our fellowship room. So this space is where we use for dinners. This space originally is where the Stryker Library was located. It was on the 2nd floor from some records that I've been able to find, and in speaking to some of the people that have historical records at the Stryker Library. So this is very interesting because I wonder how many details still exist that might have been because of the library being there. On the right-hand side is actually back up on the 3rd floor. When the building was designed, the entire 2nd floor was being rented out, but on the 3rd floor, our original dining room would have been there. And today it's basically an area, we have it named after one of our longtime members, Dick Coleman, a Lambertville resident, and that's an area that we use for some fellowship. So historically, there's been some really interesting tenants that have been in the building. I think one of the reasons why a lot of people saw this building as a public building is because the council, the Lambertville council chambers were actually there on the second floor. And that's also where the courthouse essentially was. Samuel Lilly, being the first mayor of the city, was very influential, and also being a member of Amwell Lodge. There was arrangements that were made that the city government was located in the building. On the first floor, you can see from this picture here, is the Amwell National Bank was located there, and they played an important role because they basically gave the lodge $10,000. Like I said before, the entire building cost about $16,500 at that time, and Amwell National Bank made a deal with the Masons that they would pay $10,000 to rent from that area. And they actually, I don't think it was part of the original design, but they have that canopy structure going out to the sidewalk. Had a number of different, again, here, see the Stryker Free Library was on the second floor. Here, looking at a map, trying to make sense of everything. You could see from that famous bird's view map. Unfortunately, it's the back side of the building, but you can see, interesting enough, there was actually a house on the back location. And then verifying that, looking at the Sanborn insurance map, you could also see that there's a record that shows it. And it also shows a record of the different tenants. Here's another picture. This was from the Flemington Historical Society. The picture before showed it happening in more of a patriotic, time, probably celebrating a big holiday. This is what the Amwell National Bank looks like, what it looked like on a daily basis. I did actually find records showing that Amwell National Bank asked permission to construct that structure there. So Mike, not to put you on the spot, but I would like to hand off to you so you could do this reveal, this really interesting picture here that not many people have seen.
Happy to do that. Okay, David. So David asked for, if the Historical Society has any, had any old pictures. And so sure enough, this is an 1898 photo taken by John Anderson. And you'll see that by this time, the Stryker Library, which is now the Lambertville Free Public Library, was on the first floor with what is now Vizier Jewelers. And David, did you include yeah, there you go. We've got the interior as well, silence. So let's be quiet. So these photos are two of the roughly 60 photos that we will be exhibiting. Wonderful images from the turn of the century taken by John Anderson. And when the Marshall House eventually reopens, it'll reopen with a bang, and we'll have a terrific exhibit of these photos. As you see, high resolution, and they're just really neat to get a view of what Lambertville was all about at the turn of the century.
Great, thank you, Mike. And just to finish off, this was another picture I found. This is from westjerseyhistory.org. Again, shows the backside of the building. And it's not even the star of the picture, as it's trying to show that, the train there. But what's kind of interesting is just to see that, the building in the background. And I think that that's a fitting way to kind of finish the presentation, because a lot of people don't know that we're in Lambertville. They see our building. They don't know that we're an active lodge. And next year is going to be the 175th anniversary that the lodge was instituted. And I am very appreciative and grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to everyone. And we're still compiling a lot of our history, and we're still working on plans to celebrate our 175th and to talk about the importance of Freemasonry being in the community. Again, we're a charitable organization trying to support a number of different organizations. And we're made up of a number of different people, different backgrounds, and we're really happy and proud to be a part of Lambertville. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, David. If you could stop sharing, we'll then go back to the full gallery of all the folks. And so questions are coming in on the chat. So let me first, before anyone unmutes, let me read some questions that are in chat. So is the garden tour coming back? Kate Bruning, please unmute yourself and address that burning question.
Well, I don't know. We would love to have it this year, but it's not going to happen because people cannot be close together yet. It just hasn't happened.
How many gardens? Let me ask you. How many gardens are there typically in a year?
I would say probably 7 to 8, just depending. Yes.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you over the years, because it's such a wonderful fundraising institution activity, are there any memorable gardens where when you say you'd never seen it, you'd never been to the person's house and say this is absolutely fabulous?
Oh yes, yeah, that has happened. Even we've had gardens up on the hill, and I'm not that don't really go up the hill that much. And so I just don't. I just had no reason to go there. And yeah, I know it's a hidden garden. Anyway, so I remember going and seeing this house. It just looked like a regular house. And then when we went into the backyard, it was so beautiful. It was just a typical, like a 1950s house with a garden that could have been in like Washington D.C. It was just beautiful. So yes, we do have that.
I don't know if Helen Pettit is a member of Kalmia or if you've ever had her on the tour, but she lives on Buttonwood, and I had the pleasure of doing a video of her house, and it went in the back. Absolutely fabulous garden, absolutely fantastic. And her property abuts the hardware store property, and I'm not hardware store.
No.
No,
the other one.
Name will come to me in a little bit. But anyway, a question for Kate. Back in the day, women had to be asked to become a member. Can you address the current membership procedures?
Well, the procedures are very lax now. We're happy to have anybody pretty much that wants to be part of our group. And I say every year, what we are happy about often are people who come into Lambertville. They come here, they never heard of the women's club. They come, they can have one chair. You can go and you can just go in for one time and decide whether or not it's something you'd like to do. And that's fun. And it's also fun when high school students, people that when we had sent them to college, then they come back and they want to join. So we're happy to have anybody because it's the more the merrier.
Well, that's nice to hear. David, we got some questions for you. David, number one, was Sloan a Freemason? And number two, the follow-up, did Sloan work on the Odd Fellows building as well? Both buildings have great vernacular architecture for fraternal buildings. I'm going to stop. There's a third follow-up question, but if you could do those two first, then I'll get to the third one. So David, you'll need to unmute.
Okay, thank you. I have my suspicions that Samuel Sloan would have been a Freemason. So he was based out of Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is where the Grand Lodge of Philadelphia is located. And a lot of the movers and shakers at that time would have most likely been Freemasons or attempted to be them. The only record that I could find so far is that Samuel Sloan was actually hired by the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania to actually design the Masonic building there. The current Masonic temple that's there was actually predated by the prior building that actually unfortunately caught on fire and burnt down. And that one was actually designed by Samuel Sloan. To answer the other question, like I said before, a lot of the architects, they didn't have formal training, and it was a little bit of a copycat business. I did find a record in one of the newspapers, I believe the Beacon, the Beacon, I believe it was called. And there's actually some kind of reference in there that said that the Oddfellows didn't want to be outdone by the Masons and actually built their building, obviously after we built ours, but they wanted to have a very impressive building. I have no record that Sloan was part of that. There's a different architect that was attributed to, but just like Taylor Hall, that was done by a different architect. There was no connection between that and Sloan having been part of that. Essentially, they would look at these buildings and talk to their clients, and they would kind of make a little bit of changes here and there. But the two buildings really do certainly complement each other, and we get that question. We get that question a lot. A lot of people don't even realize that there was a building located at the Oddfellows building before it was what it is today. And it'd be amazing if somewhere, if there's a picture of what that original Oddfellows building looked like before, because that's certainly a part of our history as well.
And since you mentioned the Beacon, so what for folks, if you don't know, the Lambertville Free Public Library, if you go to their website, they digitized the Beacon from the 1860s through the 19 teens, and then no, I'm sorry, that's what it was originally. Now it's up to about the 1930s, and you saw snippets of those in Kate's presentation. And then there's 1 year, 1977. I think they just did that as a test, but it's in their archive as well. If you were to go to the website, you can key term search for Freemasonry, Masonic Lodge, or Kalmia, and just a trove of data. It's at your fingertips. It's a little clunky. It takes a while to get used to their the search tool, but it's the Beacon, and so I would encourage you. And if you have I'll try to send an email out to everyone. If you've logged in, in the coming days, I'll send an email with that if you're interested, because there's a lot about the Kalmia and the Masons. David, another question: does the lodge have a collection of archival material? Because I am researching New Jersey lodges for grad school.
Yeah, so I did a follow-up. I gave our email address and mine as well. So I believe that was Eric. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. Well, we do have records. I guess part of my bio. I guess what we have actually lacked is a compilation of, or basically a summary of our history. So that's what I've been doing, is actually going into all the original archives that we have and trying to put everything together. We do have a lot of records that still exist. We have our meeting minute books from the establishment of the lodge, which is where I got a lot of my information. And I also, at the time when I started all of this, I was in grad school at Rutgers and had access to the library there. I was actually looking at the film for the Lambertville Record. And so that was also another very popular newspaper at the time. And I found some really critical information in there, and also looking at the Beacon and some other documentation that's out there, like for Hunterdon County at the time, there's like these biographies and documentation of like the city of Lambertville. And a lot of that was very, very helpful to try to put all this together.
On the subject of research and photos, so Franta Brulick from our Lambertville Free Public Library asked the question regarding the photo of Samuel Lilly, could you please arrange with David Coyce for me to receive it for the history of the library I'm doing? And could I also get the 2 pictures of the Stryker library you showed me? I'm going to take the last 2 first, and also it'll give you a flavor uh, of how do you find these, and then what can you do with them? So Franta, the John Anderson photos, the Historical Society has permission to use them in our exhibit from the Bucks County Historical Society and the Mercer Museum in Doylestown. So I can give you, quote unquote, I could send you those photos, but if you were going to use them in a book or to display them, it would just be better if you contacted them directly, and I'll follow up with you, about how to do that. So that's the last part. And then David, could you just talk about how you found, because you had included me on the emails, how you found the photo of Dr. Samuel Lilly, who was such an important figure in Lambertville's history?
Yeah, he's such an important figure, and what I'm hoping through the 175th is to try to bring extra attention to him, because I feel like he's been forgotten to history a little bit. So Dr. Lilly, I couldn't find any picture of him for a long time, and I actually reached out to the library and asked for some help and got some clues about how maybe I could find a picture of him. And because he was a doctor, he was part of the medical society, and the library, I believe, still has one of the books or the yearbooks from that. And fortunately, it's also online. I believe it's actually part of Google Books, which is also another great way to do research. So I actually found it through there. But if you don't want to go through the same thing I did to try to find it, feel free in the chat. I have the lodge email address in there. I also have my email address in there, and be more than happy to share it with you. Again, he's a really important figure in Lambertville history, and I think there's a need to try to bring more attention to who he was and what he did.
And I'll follow up if you don't get it in the chat. I'll send everybody that information. And if for some reason you don't get it, you can always email the Historical Society info@lambertvillehistoricalsociety.org, and I'm happy to do that. There's another question here. David, who owns the Masonic building? Is it on a historic registry?
So we do. The Brothers of Amwell Lodge number 12. We are the owners and operators of the entire building. That same vision that Samuel Lilly and other brothers of the lodge had continues to this day. We still operate the building. We own it. We have all the renters, all the different businesses that are there. And also the building is on the historic registry as well. And some years ago, I believe, actually received an award from the Lambertville Historic Society for perhaps some renovations that we had done a number of years ago. But yes, we are, it is on the registry.
Kate, may I ask you then the same question? Just the Kalmia Club, does it own the building? Does the city own the building? You have to unmute. You'll need to unmute yourself. Kate, you need to unmute yourself if you can. Let me see if I can do it for you. There you go.
Perfect. I couldn't unmute it. It just says Zoom on it. We do own the building. The Kalmia Club owns the building. I do not think it's on the historic thing. I don't.
So in Lambertville, that question comes up often, about a specific building. Is it on the registry?
Yes.
There are a few that are, but a lot are it's what's called contributing to the historic district. So the historic district is you can easily envision the central part of Lambertville, and many of the buildings, including both Kalmia and the Masonic Lodge, are contributing buildings to the historic district. And there are two entities, for those who don't know, in Lambertville. All of you might well know it. There's the Lambertville Historical Society. There's the Historic Preservation Committee, which is an agency of the city of Lambertville. It's very different. It's a small group of people who actually review and approve changes or that have been proposed to buildings in the historic district. So that's another kind of question that comes up a lot. Anybody else have any questions out there? We've covered through the chat. Is anybody want to unmute and chime in vocally if you don't want to do it in the chat?
Hi, I'm Michelle. I apologize. I had to join rather late, but I did have one question. I also live in a historic district in Queens, Jackson Heights, and I wanted to know if you covered already, again, I apologize, but any opportunities to participate on historical society boards or volunteer for them? Are there any specific requirements other than other participations in other boards?
So the question, are you asking for the Lambertville Historical Society?
Actually, well, why don't you tell me about yours? Yes. And then I wonder if that would apply, or is it different state by state and different historical society by historical society?
It'd be historical societies tend to be independent organizations, and there are different levels. So you've got a local like Lambertville, and then if Jackson Heights has one, Jackson Heights has one. There'll be a count. The county will have one, and then the states have one as well. But let's address the locals. So, I mean, the way it works is it's you folks who they express interest. Typically, the difference between being a member and a board is simply level of activity. So you're a member, you join, you love the programs, you love the mission, you love it's not just programs. There are things like a local historical society, for example, if it operates a museum or an historic property, a house. Well, there are folks who just love keeping that maintained, and it's critical. So like that would be an activity. So then the way the board works is just people are involved and they say, it would make sense for me to raise my level of engagement and become a board member, as opposed to just being a member. Does that kind of?
It does, Mike. Thank you.
You're welcome. I wanted to point out too, I'd still invite questions. We still got a little time, but did you all note the link between the library keeps coming up, right? We've got, I don't know if you saw during Kate's presentation, but when we resend it, you'll see the Kalmia Club has a long history of fundraising and supporting the library. And then the Masonic building is the host of the library. And so you see that it was never just up to the city government to own and operate the library. It relied on the third-party community organizations here. So like, I just thought that was interesting. That comes right up, like library, and here it is again. Oh, there's the library. So that, this goes back to the 1870s, the whole history. You see this just long, robust, whether it was the Kalmias having luncheons, fundraising lunches or dinners on a lawn of the house to raise money, that's in the Beacon, and it's for years, or the Masonic building actually hosting the Stryker library for a long time. Let's see, there's another question in the chat maybe. Will there be an opportunity to watch this later for a fee? No, yes, there will. Yes, there is. What we will. Uh, there's not going to be a fee, and we'll. Although we do welcome donations, of course, but there are a lot of. There there are also. We would encourage you, if you have the means and you're interested in supporting organizations in this COVID economy. There are other organizations that are in need as well. So. Um, yes, we accept donations, but there we actually link on our website to many others as well. Anybody else have any questions for either Kate or for David? Okay, well then, thanks so much for coming. And again, I'm going to stop recording right now.